Welcome to our deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck
Yeah.
by Mark Manson. And in this deep dive, we're going to kind of go through the book and
Yeah,
we'll
explore.
explore all of his ideas and how they might help us to kind of navigate this pressure.
Oh, the pressure.
Yeah, the pressure.
Sure. The care about everything.
Yeah, to care about everything.
It can be so overwhelming.
Right, and that's what the book kind of dives into, is how to be more selective
Yeah.
with like
Yeah.
our energy and our attention.
I think that's really at the heart of it. I mean, even though the title kind of provocative,
Yeah.
it's not actually about being apathetic. It's more about like making conscious choices about what we're going to invest our energy in.
Exactly. And, the book kicks off with this really fascinating story of Charles Bukowski,
Oh, yeah.
who, I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he was a poet and
Kind of
kind of
a cult figure.
yeah, like a really interesting guy.
Yep.
And he was very self-deprecating and, considered himself a loser even though he became like super successful.
Yeah. Embraced his flaws.
And his tombstone even reads, "Don't try,"
That's amazing.
which seems counterintuitive.
Yeah, you think you're supposed to try.
Yeah.
But it speaks to this idea of like authenticity
Yeah.
and not trying to force things.
Yeah, like not trying to fit into some mold that society has created, but just
Yeah.
being yourself and
And focusing on what makes you unique and what
yeah, and focusing on what makes you unique and
brings you joy.
yeah, and he found success by doing that.
Right.
And so then we move into chapter 2, happiness is a problem, which is a really interesting concept, right?
It is.
Because we think happiness should be the goal, right?
Yeah, we're always chasing it.
Yeah, we're always chasing it. But he kind of flips that on its head.
Yeah.
And he dives into this idea of what he calls the feedback loop from hell,
Oh, yeah.
where you get like anxious about being anxious and you get angry about being angry and
Right?
Yeah.
It just keeps feeding on itself.
Right. And he says that like this loop is fueled by this societal expectation that we should
We should always
always be happy.
be happy. Yeah.
Yeah. And it sets up this like completely unrealistic
Realistic.
expectation.
And you see this especially, I think, on social media,
Right.
where it's like this highlight reel of everyone's
That's why
supposedly perfect lives, and it makes it really easy to feel like you're not measuring up.
And so like what does the book say is
A
the
key to like genuine happiness.
yeah, like true happiness.
Well, he suggests that it actually comes from solving problems
Mm.
and not trying to like avoid negative emotions, because those emotions are actually giving us information.
Right.
They're like signals that something needs attention.
Right. Like if you think about it, like physical pain, like you feel pain, it's like,
yeah.
oh, something's wrong. I need to.
Right. It's telling you something's off.
Right.
You need to address it. So similarly, negative emotions might be a sign that there are like underlying issues that we need to deal with,
Right.
not just try to numb them or distract ourselves from them.
Right. Right. And then he introduces this concept of the disappointment panda,
Yeah, I love that.
which is hilarious.
It's so fun.
Right. This is fictional character.
Yeah, this panda
Yeah, this panda that just comes in and like
delivers these like harsh truths.
with like
You
brutal
see
honesty.
Brutal honesty
Yeah.
and humor.
And humor.
It's brilliant.
Right. And the panda's like whole point is that like life is full of problems.
Yeah.
That's just
It's inevitable.
yeah, it's inevitable.
We're not going to avoid them.
Right. And the key is to find good problems.
Right.
The problems that are like aligned with our values and that are worth solving.
Yes.
Right. And so then chapter 4, the value of suffering, is sort of a continuation of that.
Okay.
And he poses this question like, what pain are you willing to endure?
What are you willing to
Yeah.
struggle for?
Yeah. What are you willing to struggle for?
Because I think the book really emphasizes the idea that
Yeah.
anything worth achieving is probably going to involve some level
Of struggle.
Yeah.
Of suffering.
Right. And he actually uses his own experience
Oh, yeah.
of giving up on a music career to illustrate this point,
Right.
because he realized that he wasn't actually in love with the process of making music.
Right.
He was just in love with the imagined outcome.
Right. He just wanted to be,
With the rock star.
yeah, a rock star.
But he wasn't willing to put in the work,
yeah.
the grind, the
Yeah.
struggle that it takes
And so it's like,
to actually get there.
like that journey is just as important as the destination.
Exactly. And the challenges we overcome along the way can be incredibly valuable.
Right. They teach us so much.
They teach us so much.
Yeah. And then chapter 5, you are always choosing. This chapter really dives into like the power of
It's values.
values. Yeah. And the idea that our values like drive our choices, even the unconscious ones.
even the ones we're not aware of.
Yeah.
And those values determine the problems that we create for ourselves.
Right.
And to illustrate this, he tells these really interesting stories about Dave Mustaine and Pete Best.
Oh,
Do you know those names?
I know Dave Mustaine.
Okay, so Dave Mustaine is the founder of Megadeth.
Right.
And he was actually in Metallica before that.
Right.
He got kicked out.
Right. Yeah.
And so even though he went on to have like huge success with Megadeth,
Right.
he constantly measured himself against Metallica.
Oh, wow.
And it fueled this feeling of like failure and inadequacy,
Oh, interesting.
even though objectively he was incredibly successful.
Wow.
And then on the flip side, you have Pete Best,
Okay.
who was the drummer for the Beatles
Right.
before Ringo Starr.
Right.
And he got fired like right before they made it big.
Right before they hit it big.
Yeah, so you'd think he'd be like
Devastating.
totally miserable.
Yeah.
But he actually ended up finding a lot of happiness
Oh.
because he shifted his values. He decided that family and like a simpler life were more important to him.
So he prioritized different things.
Exactly. And so that shows how aligning your actions with your values can lead to,
To true fulfillment.
yeah,
Yeah. So that's a really powerful story.
it is.
And then we move into chapter 6. You're wrong about everything,
Oh,
but so am I.
this is a good one.
This is a really good one.
Yeah.
And it really emphasizes this importance of self-awareness
Yes.
and like challenging,
Challenging our own beliefs.
our own belief.
Because, we tend to cling to narratives
Right.
that make us feel good,
Right.
even if they're not necessarily based in reality.
Right. Or if they're not like serving us.
Exactly.
Right.
And he tells this really powerful story in this chapter about a woman named Meredith
Okay.
who falsely accused her father of abuse.
Oh, wow.
And it turned out that it was like a combination of factors
Wow.
that kind of skewed her memory.
Oh, wow.
There was like therapy and
Oh, wow.
suggestive questioning.
Wow. So like
Yeah, and it's just this really...
the power of suggestion.
Yeah, and it just highlights how easily our brains can create stories
Yeah.
that justify our pain, even if they're not entirely accurate.
Yeah.
And so that really underscores this importance of embracing doubt,
Right. Like being open to the possibility that,
that we might be wrong,
yeah, it might be wrong.
because it allows us to grow and learn from our mistakes.
Yeah.
If we're always certain,
Yeah.
then we're never going to be open to new information or
Right.
new perspectives.
Right. So that's kind of a wrap up of the first 6 chapters
Yeah.
of the subtle art of not giving a fuck.
And I think it's a really good foundation for understanding
Yeah.
kind of the overall message of the book.
Right. And so in the next part, we'll dive into the last 3 chapters.
Yeah, we'll see what other insights we can uncover.
Yeah. And how we can kind of put these ideas into practice.
Absolutely.
So stay tuned.
We'll be right back. And then we jump into chapter 7. Failure is the way forward. And this one is all about challenging that fear of failure that so many of us have.
Right. Like we let that fear kind of paralyze us.
Totally.
Yeah.
And Mark Manson shares his own experience of graduating college during a recession
Oh, what?
and facing a ton of setbacks early on.
Right. Like you think that would be a terrible thing. But
Yeah, but he actually kind of frames it as like a positive experience.
Interesting.
Yeah, because it forced him to like hit rock bottom and he realized
Oh,
there was a certain freedom in that.
like nothing else to lose kind of.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it kind of freed him up to take more risks.
Right. Like he could experiment more. He didn't have to be so afraid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
And I think the takeaway for the reader is that, failures is inevitable.
It is.
It's going to happen.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be this like catastrophic thing.
Right.
It's actually like a crucial part of the learning process.
Like it's how we learn and grow.
Exactly. So embrace it.
Embrace the failure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
And then in chapter 8, we get into the importance of saying no.
Oh, yeah. Boundaries.
Yes.
Boundaries.
Where's- So important. So important. And he uses this really interesting example in this chapter.
Okay.
He talks about Romeo and Juliet.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how like our culture romanticizes this kind of like
Toxic relationship.
toxic,
Yeah.
obsessive love.
Right. Like that's not real love.
Yeah. It's not healthy.
Yeah.
And he argues that, true love is not about trauma and codependency.
Right. It's about respect and
Mutual respect, healthy boundaries,
yeah,
and taking responsibility for your own well-being.
your own happiness.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this chapter really emphasizes the power of saying no
Yeah.
and being okay with rejection.
Like not taking it personally.
Exactly, because you can't please everyone.
Right.
And it's okay to disappoint people sometimes.
And it's more important to like prioritize your own needs and values.
Yes,
That-
absolutely.
Right.
That's how you build healthy relationships.
Healthy relationships. Yeah. And he also talks about trust in this chapter,
Oh.
like how it's built, how it's broken, how it can be rebuilt.
Okay, so like if you've broken trust,
Hmm.
how do you go about rebuilding it?
Well, he says it requires genuine self-awareness
Okay,
and consistent effort to change your behavior.
so not just like saying sorry.
Right. It's not enough to just apologize.
Right, you have to actually change your actions.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Actions speak louder than words.
Right.
And then we come to the final chapter.
Okay, the grand finale.
Yes. And then you die.
Wow. That's
It's a heavy one.
it's a heavy hitter.
It is, but it's also very profound.
Okay.
And in this chapter, he really confronts the reality of mortality.
Head on.
Yeah, he shares this really personal story about losing a close friend
Oh wow.
in a tragic accident.
This is so sorry.
Yeah, it was really tough for him, and it forced him to grapple with like his own mortality
Yeah.
and the meaninglessness of avoiding discomfort.
Right, like we're all going to die eventually.
Yeah, exactly. So why spend our lives trying to avoid pain and suffering?
Right, like that's a part of life.
It is, and it's actually what makes the good stuff even better.
Right, you can appreciate the good more.
Exactly. And he connects this to the work of Ernest Becker, who was this scholar who argued that our fear of death drives us to create these like immortality projects.
Immortality projects, okay.
Yeah, which are basically like these unhealthy pursuits of meaning and validation.
Like what would those be?
Well, it could be anything from chasing fame and fortune
Okay.
to clinging to rigid ideologies.
Right, like anything that makes us feel like we're going to live on somehow?
Exactly, yeah, or that our lives have like ultimate meaning and significance.
Okay.
And Manson suggests that acknowledging our mortality can actually be really liberating.
Oh, how so?
Well, it allows us to prioritize what truly matters,
right.
to let go of those superficial pursuits,
Right.
and to focus on leaving a positive legacy.
Like what kind of legacy do we want to leave behind?
Exactly.
That's a good question.
And he shares this really powerful anecdote about standing on a cliff at the Cape of Good Hope.
Oh, wow.
And he's like feeling this pull towards oblivion.
I can only imagine.
Yeah, and he has this profound realization that there's nothing to fear.
No?
And this acceptance of death actually helped him to dismantle a lot of the fear that was holding him back in life.
Interesting. So like facing that fear actually freed him in a way.
Exactly.
Wow, that's powerful.
It is, and it leads into this discussion about the dangers of clinging to certainty.
Okay.
You know, we like to think that we have all the answers,
Right.
but Manson encourages us to embrace uncertainty.
To be okay with not knowing.
Yeah, to question our belief.
To be open to being wrong.
Exactly, and he actually uses this psychological experiment
Okay.
to illustrate how our brains are wired to seek patterns.
Right. We like to find meaning in
Yeah,
things.
even when there isn't
And
any.
you try to connect the dots.
Exactly, and that can be helpful in some situations, but it can also lead us astray.
Right. It can make us cling to beliefs that are unfounded.
Yeah, or even harmful.
Right.
And he brings back the story of Meredith.
The woman who falsely accused her father
Yeah.
of abuse.
Right, and it kind of serves as this cautionary tale about the fallibility of memory.
Right. Like we can't always trust our own memories.
Exactly, and the importance of being critical of our own perceptions and beliefs.
So if we can't completely trust our own memories,
Yeah,
how do we determine what's true?
that's the big question, right?
Yeah.
And Manson proposes this framework for examining our beliefs.
All right.
And it starts with asking ourselves this question.
Okay. What is it?
What if I'm wrong? Just that simple question.
It's simple but powerful.
It is, because it forces us to consider alternative explanations,
Right.
to challenge those narratives that we've created.
Yeah.
And then he builds on that with another question. Why do I hold this belief?
So like what's the motivation behind it?
Yeah, what are the underlying values that are shaping our perspective?
Okay.
And is this belief actually serving us, or is it holding us back?
Right. So like is it helping us or hurting us?
Exactly.
Okay.
And then the final question is, would being wrong create a better or worse problem for myself and others?
So it's like looking at the consequences
Yeah.
of our belief.
Exactly. And would letting go of this belief actually lead to a more positive outcome?
That's a really interesting framework.
It is. It's a really helpful tool for kind of examining those deeply held beliefs.
Right. And being more open to changing our minds.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then Manson also talks about this concept of choosing our struggles,
Oh, yeah.
which I think is really interesting.
It is. He acknowledges that we can't avoid problems altogether.
Right. Life is full of problems.
It is, but we have the power to choose which problems we're willing to face.
It's like, what are we willing to struggle for?
Exactly. Yeah, and that choice is tied to our values.
Right.
What are the things that truly matter to us?
Right. What are we passionate about?
What are we willing to fight for?
Yeah.
And by identifying our values, we can choose problems that align with those values.
So the struggles become more meaningful.
Exactly. And the potential rewards are more fulfilling.
Right, because we're actually working towards something that matters to us.
Yes. And he uses this analogy of running a marathon versus having a leg amputated.
Okay, that's quite a stark contrast.
It is, but both involve pain.
Right,
But one is a choice.
right. We choose to run the marathon.
Exactly.
Hey, listen.
We're choosing to endure that pain for the sake of achieving something.
And the other is like forced upon us.
Exactly.
Wow.
And so choosing our struggles allows us to embrace the pain that comes with growth and self-improvement.
Okay, so it's like pain with a purpose.
Exactly.
Ugh.
And then he talks about this idea of victimhood chic.
Victimhood chic, what's that?
It's this tendency to define ourselves by our perceived injustices
Okay.
and to seek validation through outrage.
Right, like playing the victim.
Yeah. And while he acknowledges that it's important to address real injustices,
Of course.
he cautions against dwelling in victimhood because it can actually prevent us from taking responsibility for our own lives
Right.
and working towards positive change.
So it's like it can become a crutch.
Yeah, it can hold us back.
Yeah.
And so he encourages us to shift our focus from blame to action.
So like what can we do to make things better?
Exactly.
Instead of just complaining about how unfair everything is.
And he also highlights the importance of developing a healthy relationship with rejection.
Oh yeah. Rejection's tough.
It is, but it's an inevitable part of life.
It is.
And learning to accept it gracefully allows us to pursue our goals without fear of judgment or disappointment.
So like don't let the fear of rejection hold you back.
Exactly.
And this ties back to the importance of setting boundaries in our relationships.
Right. He distinguishes between healthy and unhealthy love.
Okay.
And he argues that unhealthy love is often based on this need to escape our own problem.
Like using the other person as a distraction?
Yeah, by losing ourselves in another person. And healthy love, on the other hand, involves two individuals who are willing to face their own challenges.
Right, and support each other
Exactly.
through those challenges.
And it's about mutual respect, open communication,
Yeah.
a willingness to both give and receive.
That's beautiful.
And then he talks about commitment,
Okay.
which is something we don't often think about in a positive light.
Right, we think of it as like restrictive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he suggests that it can actually free us from this endless pursuit of more.
Interesting.
Because when we commit to something,
It's like a relationship,
a career.
a creative pursuit.
Yeah.
We're making a conscious choice to prioritize that thing above all other options.
Right. So we're not constantly looking around wondering if there's something better out there.
Exactly, and it allows us to focus our energy.
To go deep instead of spreading ourselves thin.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so the subtle art of not giving a fuck, it's not about becoming apathetic or nihilistic.
And right, it's not about not caring about anything. It's about choosing what matters most to us.
And letting go of the rest.
Exactly.
Yeah, I like that.
It's about taking responsibility for our own lives, embracing uncertainty, learning to fail forward,
Finding freedom and commitment.
and meaning in the face of our own mortality.
Wow, that's a really powerful message.
It is.
So this book is really about like living a more intentional life.
I think that's a great way to put it.
Yeah, like choosing what we want to focus on.
And not letting ourselves get bogged down by all the things that don't really matter.
Exactly.
And I think that's a really valuable message for anyone who's feeling overwhelmed by the pressure to care about everything.
Yeah, like it's okay to not give a fuck about some things.
It is. And in fact, it's essential.
Right.
Because it frees up our energy and attention for the things that do matter.
Yeah, so it's not about being careless or insensitive.
Right.
It's about being selective with our fucks.
Exactly.
I like that.
I think that's a great way to sum it up.
Well, this has been a really insightful deep dive.
And-
I really enjoyed exploring this book with you.
Me too. It's a fascinating read.
It is, and I think it offers a lot of valuable lessons for all of us.
Absolutely.
So thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the subtle art of not giving a fuck.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll see you next time.